Masechet Sotah, Daf Mem Daled, in which we complete the 8th perek of the Masechet. We were in the middle of a series of statements in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and this is the last one. V'amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Met tofes arba amot letum'ah. If there is a corpse, then if someone who, of course, touches it or makes an ohel, puts himself over it, even not touching, but is hovering over it, becomes tameh. And now he adds that actually 4 amot all around it. The rabbis say, listen, you should try to keep away. If you're going to go plan on eating korbanot, then keep far away from a corpse, because if you're standing close to it, you may reach out your hand, you may bend over, and then you will end up making an ohel and become tameh lamet. So therefore, 4 amot around the corpse, about 6 by 6 feet. One should stay away from that area. V'tana tuna, and in fact, we have a Mishnah in Masechet Ohalot that teaches a similar law. Hasad hakebed ha'omed betocha tahor, vehu sheyehe ba 4 amot ibre bet shamai, bet hillel omrim 4 tefachim. If you have a courtyard of a grave, so now the first law that we just said is talking not only if there's a corpse right there above ground, but even if it's buried underground, one should keep away. I think this probably applies to Kohanim also, that not only should they not go right up to a grave, but they should keep some distance to it. And now the Mishnah talks about a hatzer. So in the olden days, times of the Talmud, they didn't always bury in the ground. They buried in caves, like this one here. And they might dig it out. It could be a natural cave or an artificial cave. And then so there would be an area of the cave where they actually put the bodies in. And they might leave them there on a shelf and then come back a year later and gather the bones and put them in a jar. And so that's the area of the grave itself. But then there'd be another area, a front area, like a foyer or a courtyard, that would be separated off from the area of the grave. And so that area over there, the Mishnah teaches, if you're in that area, tahor. The point is that even if you're actually closer than 4 amot to the grave, because it's an independent area, and that area, according to Bet Shammai, is 6 by 6 feet in itself, that constitutes a separate area, and then you're not going to mistakenly reach a hand or reach over into the grave area. That's a Bet Shammai. Bet Hillel is even more lenient, and he says, if that courtyard, even if it's just 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim, just 12 inches, it's clearly marked off, that's sufficient of a separate area. Good. When do we allow this leniency? Shepitcha milemala, aval pitcha minasa divrei hakol 4 amot. Bet Hillel says you can do this 4 tefachim only when the opening is from the top. In other words, we're talking about, let's say, picture a manhole, and so a person to enter into this crypt would have to jump down and then enter into this little cave. So in that case, Bet Shammai would be lenient, but if the opening is to the side, like in this picture, where you go into the side, there might be some steps down, everyone agrees that you need 4 amot. Now we ask about this language here of this baraita, kelape laya. It should be the opposite. Adraba min hasad midrid v'nafek milamala yevshad de la mahil. If you're entering from the side, then it's easy not to be careful and not overshadow the grave. And so in that case, it makes sense, Bet Hillel would say, even if it's a small area and it's separated off, then I'm in this area, and you're not going to cover over. You can you can go in that little courtyard, and you'll be still tahor. That will be fine, because the entrance is from the side. So you could walk easily into it. Maybe there's a stair or two, but that's no problem. So that's where we should be lenient. Whereas in the case of the manhole type, if you're jumping in, then it's impossible that you're not going to make an ohel. When you're jumping in or when you're climbing out, you're going to be reaching out your hands and your feet in order to grab onto this wall and to that wall. And there, it's very likely that you will extend over. So in that case, if it's only the 12 inches, then no, Bet Hillel would say no good. Only if it's 4 amot. 4 amot, that's the size of a person, that then you can extend, there's room to extend and climb down and climb up. So we have to switch it around and then it makes sense, right? When does Bet Hillel say that all you need is a small area, 4 tefachim, that's only if the entrance is from the side. But if it's from the top, even Bet Hillel would agree, you need 4 amot. And this all applies to a courtyard adjacent to a grave where there's a partition. And you can see the partition, like a doorway. And that way, even though it's very close, but you can recognize, I'm not going to go past that partition. But if it's just a corpse outside or inside without a partition around it, then you have to stay away 4 amot around the corpse. All right, that was the last law. That was a tangent. And now we go back to the Mishnah. Mia isha shed eras isha. The Kohen and Shoter will announce anyone who is engaged to be married but not married yet should go home. Tinrabanan asher eras echad ha'me'ares et ha'betula ve'echad ha'me'ares et ha'almana ve'echad shomeret yavam. And so this Baraita teaches, similar to the Mishnah, that one does kiddushin not only with a betula but also with an almana, so with a widow, or a shomeret yavam, his brother died without children and how he's awaiting to do yibum. Yibum is like marriage, so the shomeret yavam is like an engagement. And if one of them died, and even if there's 5 brothers, there were 5 brothers and one of them died, then each of them potentially could do yibum, even though the oldest usually does it, but any of them can do it. Whoever does it first will be married. So they all come back from the war because they all potentially could be the one. So they're all basically engaged to this woman. Just whoever consummates will be the one that will be the husband. Now, lo lakach velo lekacha perat la'almana lekohen gadol gerusha v'chalusa lekohen hediot mamzer netina l'Yisrael bat Yisrael lemamzer u'natin. The pasuk says anyone who has betrothed but did not take in marriage. Now it could say lo lakach, but it adds an extra pronoun. Did not take her in marriage. What's the extra pronoun doing? It's a limiting her and only her, and this comes to exclude illegal marriages, as we saw in the Mishnah, but now this Baraita is giving the source for it, that if a Kohen Gadol is married to an Almanah, or is engaged to an Almanah, Kohen Hediot is engaged to a Gerusha Chalusa, or a regular Jew, kosher Jew to a Mamzer Netina, or the other way around, a kosher woman to a mamzer male or a natin, all these are prohibited marriages, and therefore, if one entered into such a prohibited relationship, he is not exempt from battle. He's got to go into battle anyway. This is not a milestone to look forward to. I didn't get to finalize my marriage with someone I'm not allowed to be with. No, that's not an excuse for an exemption. Now, lema delak Rabbi Yosef Galili. This Baraita seems like it's not the opinion of Rabbi Yosef Galili. Rabbi Yosef Galili ha'amar hayareh v'racha lebab zeh hamityareh me'averot shebeyado. We're going to see the source from this Mishnah in a couple of minutes. But Rabbi Yosef Galili, as we also already saw, says that when the Torah gives the 4th category, someone who is fearful and faint-hearted, it doesn't mean literally that they have no courage to fight. It means that they have sin, and because they know they're guilty of something or other, then they're afraid they're going to die in battle because of the sins. Therefore, someone who is entering an illegal marriage is a sinner and gets an exemption, right? They will be exempt from the war. So a gerusha, Kohen is marrying a gerusha, should be exempt from war. This is in direct contradiction to this Baraita that says lo lakach lo lekacha, the extra pronoun comes to exclude these prohibited marriages from an exclusion, that they actually have to go to war. The Biosegeli sounds like they don't have to go to war. So what do we do about this? And the answer is afilu tema de Biosegeli. We'd rather that baraita not be only some opinions. We'd rather it be unanimous, and we can explain it according to Biosegeli also. Kidraba, damaraba, Lolam eno chayav ad sheyiv'ol. Ma ta'am lo yikach mishum lo yichalel. Mishum hachi eno lokeh ad sheyiv'ol. We're going to explain, as Rabbah does, that a person like a Kohen Gadol who marries an almanah, or any other of those prohibited marriages, are not liable unless they actually do bi'ah. If you just did kiddushin, so what? You just gave her a ring. That is not tantamount to liability just yet. What's the source for Rabbah's explanation? It's from the Pisukim here that says regarding a Kohen Gadol, almanah groshavach la'azona et ele lo yikach. Lo yikach means he cannot sleep with her and marry her. Because if he does lo yikach, then velo yechalel zaro be'amav. So he should not do lo yikach, because otherwise he will violate lo yechalel. In other words, he only profanes his offspring if he actually marries her. But if he only does kiddushin, then he does not profane his offspring. So you connect these two verbs, lo yikach. Only if lo yikach, then he will be yechalel. So better not to do that, so you will not be mechalel. Okay, and so he says because of this, because of lo yikach, eno lokeh ad sheyiv'ol. Because of this darasha, he learns that you do not get, this kohen will not get lashes unless he actually does bi'ah. Therefore, in this case here in the Braita, this is someone who only did kiddushin and not nisu'in, so he didn't sin. Because he didn't sin, he's not included in the fourth category. Rather, he is included in this dirasha, lo lakaha, that the exclusion of war does not apply to these people. So therefore, if he just did kiddushin with someone he's not allowed to marry but didn't actually marry them yet, then they have to go to war, right? Because of this exclusion. On the other hand, someone who actually sinned, like if they actually got married or whatever other sin he did, then according to the Biosei Galili, that he would go home, right? Because that would be a different category. So we can account for both this Braita and the Mishnah, both according to the Biosei Galili. Good. Tenor Banan. Asher bana, asher nata, asher eras. Limeda Torah derech eres. Okay, now that we spoke about the three different exclusions in the Torah, we have a beautiful derasha about the order that the Torah teaches them to us. That these derashot, these exclusions from war, not only teach us about the value of life versus war and the importance of milestones, right? This is, super beautiful teachings. But even from the order, Torah first mentions someone who built a house, and then someone who made a vineyard, and only then someone who is going to get married. So the Torah teaches you the proper way of behavior. That first a person should build a house and get a job, plant a vineyard, or whatever job he's going to get, and only then he should go and get married. Don't get married and I have nowhere to live, I have no job. Rambam, interestingly, when he codifies this, changes the order of the first two. You shouldn't build a house first and then get a job. The opposite, get a job first and then you can afford to build and maintain a house, right? But the achar kach is really only applies to the after these two, right? Just get your financial stuff in order and then get married. And Shlomo in Mishle also said regarding this pasuk, prepare your work outside and make it fit for yourself in the field, and afterwards build your house. In other words, Shlomo is saying, get all the raw materials ready that you're going to need out there, and then come and build your house afterwards. So the Midrash explains, "Hachen bachus melachtecha ze bait, v'ateda basadelach ze kerem achar banita ubanita betecha zo isha." When it says go and to prepare outside, that's talking about building a house, and then go to the field, that's talking about planting a vineyard, and then build betecha. that betecha, bait, is isha, like in Aramaic, debitu is isha. So therefore, that makes sense, right? Go out first and set up the foundation, and when you have everything prepared, then you can marry and bring your wife into the home that you built. דבר אחר, הכן בחוץ מלאכתך זה מקרא, ועתידה בשדה לך זה משנה, אחר ובנית ביתך זה גמרא, or a different explanation altogether of the very same pasuk, but this is the proper methodology when one is studying. First, you should prepare the raw materials. That's Tanakh. You have to go and learn the whole Tanakh. And then, Mishnah, and then you're going to put everything together. That's the next level of learning. That's Mishnah, the oral law, that you'll learn by heart. And only after that, you can build upon it, which is the final goal, and that's Gemara. Now, we're studying Gemara, so this word Gemara cannot be referring to the text that we're reading, because the text that we're reading didn't exist yet when this derasha was made. Rather, the word Gemara in the Gemara means not a text, but rather a methodology. It's a methodology of taking all the source material, the Pesukim and the Mishnayot, and other Tannaitic material, and building one thing upon the other, taking various sources, combining them, noting contradictions, resolving them, deriving one thing from the other, figuring out what the halacha is, figuring out the reasons for everything. Right, all that is the shakla v'tariyah, the process of Talmud, which is the goal. דבר אחר, אכן בחוץ מלאכתך זה מקרא ומשנה, ועתידה בשדה לך זה גמרא, אחר ובנית ביתך, אלו מעשים טובים. But another interpretation says that the first step is learning Mikra and Mishnah. That's all the source material. And then the second step is Gemara. And there's a third step. The Gemara is not the final step, but rather Masim Tovim. All that study is so that you can go out and fulfill it and do good deeds and help people in the world. That's the second. Now, third opinion, it goes even beyond that. Rabbi Eliezer ben Noshe Rabbi Yosef Galili Omer, הכן בחוץ מלאכתך זה מקרא ומשנה וגמרא, ועתידה בשדה לך אלו מעשים טובים, ואחר ובנית ביתך דרוש וקבל שכר. He says that the first step, the raw materials, all that is mikra and mishnah and gemara. That's just step one. Second step is good deeds, but that's not even the final goal, but rather the real building that you achieve after all that is derosh, go out and teach, expound, be creative, right? Build get students, a community, right? And when you go out and expound, then you receive reward for all those who you influence, and that is the ultimate goal. A beautiful derasha. Okay, now we go back to the Mishnah. We have a list of people that do not return from war, because even though they built something, they only built a gateway or a balcony, and that's not called a bayit. So they don't go back. Two laws about that. If someone built a house, already had the house, and he adds one row of stones, he does some kind of renovation, then he's exempt from war, because that's also a happy thing, even though it's not a completely new house. That's sufficient. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, אף הבונה בית לבנים בשרון לא היה חוזר. טענה מפני שמחדשין אותו פעמיים בשבוע. Rabbi Eliezer says the opposite case of someone's actually building a whole house, but because it's built in Sharon, on the plain area near the coast in Israel, and it's like building on quicksand, the clay there is soft, and therefore that person is not considered a permanent house, and they would not get an exemption. The Braita adds, because they have to rebuild their house twice every 7 years. Every 3.5 years, you better rebuild it, because otherwise it starts to crack, it gets weak, and it can fall on the inhabitants. And therefore, building a house there is not a big happy occasion. It's just like pitching a tent. It's temporary. And there's another category of people that don't even have to go out to the border. They stay home the whole time, and they don't even help in the war effort. And so this would be from the pasuk in Devarim 24 that says, when someone takes a new wife, he does not go to the army, he shall not be charged with any business, he shall be free for his house for 1 year, and cheer his wife whom he has taken. So we learn from this that for a new wife, in other words, if you only did kiddushin but not nisuin, then you don't go to war, but you do have to help in the war effort by bringing food and water and fixing the roads. But if you actually did get married the first year, total exemption from everything. Now, I only know that that's a new wife. If it's a first marriage. But what if it's her second marriage? She was already a widow or a divorcee, and then they marry someone else. How do you know that that also is included? Well, because it says Isha. And so Isha means any woman. Well, imken matam domad Isha hadasha. So why did it say Isha hadasha? It sounds like it has to be. In what way would it be new? What would that exclude? Misha hadasha lo yasa machazi gerushato shen hadasha lo. So only if it's a new wife for the husband. If it doesn't matter if she was married before. If she was never married to him, so this is a new relationship. And that's a very happy thing when it's a new relationship and you want to spend 1 year, the first year together. So this would exclude someone who's already married to the same woman. They get divorced and then they remarry the same very couple. They don't need to he doesn't need to cheer her for 1 year because they already live together. And their first time around. So this is not actually anything new. It's just coming back and continuing the marriage as before. And so therefore is not exempt from war. תנו רבנן, לא יעשה בסבא, יכול בסבא הוא דלא יעשה, אבל יספיק מזון, או מים ומזון ויתקן הדרכים. Now it says that the newlyweds do not go out to war, but maybe, it says they don't go out to war, but maybe they do have to help the war effort and do other things. That's why the Pasuk continues and says, he will not be charged with any business. He has no duties. That's the whole point. He has to be home. ויכול שאני מרבה אף הבונה בית לא חנכו נטע כרם ולא חיללו ארס אישה ולא לקחה. Now, I might think that I should include the first or the earlier category of someone who did not yet achieve the milestone but is waiting, that they built a house but didn't live in it, they planted but didn't get the fruit, they did kiddushin but not nisuin. Maybe they also don't have to do any work. Alav. No, it says a limiting word, alav, only the one who married already, he doesn't have to do any work at all right, for him. But others, they have to. And there's no reason why not. Because if someone does did kiddushin, or they're waiting for their plants to grow, so they're not busy with anything, they don't have to go to war because they may die, and then someone else, they're looking forward to this thing, and someone else will come swoop in and get to eat those grapes or live in his house. And that is too sad. And so therefore he doesn't go to war, so he doesn't die. But he's very capable and can help in the war effort. There's no reason not to. Whereas someone who got married, who just got married within the 1 year, no, we want him to now enjoy. Enjoy is not just for 1 day, for 1 week. It means to enjoy at least for 1 year. Now, if it says he can't do any work, any business at all, wouldn't that be all the more so that he's not going to go to war? Why do you have to tell me that he can't go to war if he can't do anything at all? The answer is just stay home. And the answer is that he would violate twice. If a newlywed couple decided they're going to go out to war, his husband's going to go out to war, then he violates two prohibitions. Number one, that he went out to war, and second, that he involved himself with some business, and he's not allowed to do anything at all. So that's double. That's even worse. Good. Next Mishnah. So in the third category of statements, the officers alone go and tell the people, anyone who is fearful and faint-hearted, he should go back home. רבי עקיבא אומר, הערך ורח על לבב כמשמעו, שאינו יכול לעמוד בקשרי המלחמה ולא חרב שלופה. Rabbi Akiva gives the first interpretation, כמשמעו, literally, that the person is unable to stand in the battle ranks and see a drawn sword, because it will terrify him. He's going to be there, right, see all these swords and be scared, start shaking. You don't want that guy in the line to demoralize the rest of the troops. He should go home. That's Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yosef Galili אומר, הירך ורח הלבב, זהו המתיירא מן העבירות שבידו. לפיכך תרתה לו התורה את כל אלו שיחזור בגללן. Rabbi Yosef Galili, that's the third generation Tana, the colleague of Rabbi Akiva. He disagrees and says, no, this means not literally scared of war, but rather scared of sin. Because he has some kind of major transgression, he's worried that he's going to die in battle as a punishment for the sin. And so he gets an exemption. So it's a spiritual fear, not a physical fear. Now, interestingly, he goes on to explain that the Torah it does not want to embarrass this person, and that's why he gives all the first three categories. You see, if you only had the last category of only someone who sinned, so can you imagine? The officer would say, anyone who sinned, go home now. And then, 10 people go. And everybody's like, oh, what kind of terrible thing did he do? And that would be embarrassing for them. And maybe they would not want to go home, or they would go home and they'd be publicly shamed. Torah doesn't want to publicly shame a person, even though they sinned. So they're going to go, hopefully make teshuvah, but no need to publicly shame them. And that's why the Torah puts 4 different exemptions together, so that they'll announce anyone who has under these 4 exemptions will go home, and then a bunch of people will go home, and nobody knows, oh, maybe he's going home because he has a vineyard that he didn't yet take the fruit of, and people won't assume it's necessarily because the person is a sinner. So look how beautiful is the Torah is, that it does not want to make people publicly admit something shameful. All right, those are 2 opinions. Now we have yet a third opinion of Rabbi Yosef. This Rabbi Yosef is the 4th generation Tana, the student of Rabbi Akiva, different from Rabbi Yosef Gelili. And he says, Amana l'kohen gadol gerusha v'chalusa l'kohen nejot, mamzeret untina l'Yisrael bat Yisrael mamzer natin, harehu hayare v'rach halebab. He says that if someone is entering into a prohibited marriage, like a kohen gadol to a namana, regular kohen to a gerusha, or a woman who is not kosher, she's a mamzeret natina who marries a kosher man, or a kosher woman who marries a non-kosher man, and he's a mamzer or a natin, these are all sinners, and therefore are included in the last category, and they have to go home because they are sinners. Now, this Rabbi Yosef sounds a lot like Rabbi Yosef Gelili. Rabbi Yosef Gelili said it in a more general way. Anyone who's afraid of Averot. Rabbi Yosef said some particular examples, but it looks like they're saying something very similar, and the Gemara is going to ask about exactly that. Now, after they do all that, the officers will conclude, and then they will appoint captains over the people. The Mishnah adds, not only do they appoint captains berosh to lead the people in the front and lead the way, show them where to go, they also station guards at the back. Mamidin zikifin lifnehem ve'acharehem מאחוריהם וחשילין של ברזל בידיהם. וכל מבקש לחזור רשות בידו לקפח את שוקיו שתחילת ניסה נפילה. And the officers station guards in the front of them to lead the way, but other guards behind them who are holding iron rods, and anyone. Now, the people who were exempt already left, so they're finished. Now, everybody else, it has to fight. If they're going to march, and someone decides they want to go AWOL, they're scared, and now, or whatever, they decided they don't want to fight anymore, and they want to flee from the war. Now they're not allowed. They lost their chance. If they were scared, they had to be scared before. And so now the guards in the back can beat his legs and force him back onto the marching line to go and fight. Why? Because this is really dangerous. If one person runs away and then the next person sees that and runs away, it will ruin the entire morale, right? The beginning of fleeing is downfall. In other words, once a few people start fleeing from the battlefield, that's it. There's no hope. They're definitely going to lose. So you got to keep the guards in the rear to get them to go and fight in case they change their minds. Now, how do you know that fleeing is the first step towards downfall? Shenemar, Nas Yisrael lifnei Pelishtim v'gam mageva gedola hayta ba'am. Ulanu omer vayanusu anshe Yisrael mipnei Pelishtim vayipelu halalim. One pasuk, and Shmuel says Israel fled before the Pelishtim. So first they fled, and then it says there was a great slaughter. So first fleeing, and then there's going to be a great slaughter. Or the second one, the men of Israel fled before the Pelishtim, and they fell in Mount Had Gilboa. So you see, first they flee, and then they're going to fall. So we need these guards to make sure that the soldiers don't start running away. במה דברים אמורים במלחמות הרשות אהבה מלכות מצווה הכל יוסין אפילו חתן מחדרו וכלה מחופתה. Now all the exemptions that we've been talking about this whole time, all those the person who built a house and all that, all those exemptions only apply to an elective war, milchemet hareshut. We're going to define this in the Gemara. This means a war of expansion. Right, we want to go and get more land for Israel. That you don't have to do that. That you can decide. You want to go on an offensive war. So then the exemptions apply, and these people go home. But if it's a milchemet mitzvah, also we're going to define this is a war that you have to, you're commanded to. This would be either a defensive war or a war to conquer Israel in the first place, the main borders within the borders of Israel. So in that case, everybody has to fight, no exemptions. Even the groom from his room and the bride from her wedding canopy, even though they just got married, and we said that newlyweds, they don't have to go to the battlefield, they could just stay home because they have to stay 1 year, and there's 2 violations, prohibitions if they go and fight. Yeah, all that was only for an expansionary war, but a commanded war, everybody goes. There's some discussion here. Certainly the groom has to go. It says here that the bride also goes. So some say that the bride also has to go to war, that in the time of need, that there's an enemy at the gate, then women have to go and fight too. Others say, no, this is just an expression. It means that they're no longer going to stay in the marriage canopy. Marriage canopy is not like just we make today and use for an hour. It means they would build a tent or a starter home that they would actually live in, at least for 7 days. So once he's not there, she's not going to be with him, so she's not there either. So it's just a phrase to mean that they are not going to be in their new home together, but doesn't necessarily mean that she's actually also going out to war. But certainly she would help in the war effort. אמר רבי יהודה, במה דברים אמורים במלחמות מצווה, אבל במלחמות חובה הכל יוסין אפילו חתן מחדרו וכלה מחופתה. So Rabbi Yehuda, he basically agrees with the Tanakama, except uses slightly different language. What we had over here as milchemet reshut, he calls milchemet mitzvah. He's referring also to expansionary wars, but he's saying expansionary wars is not simply reshut, it's actually mitzvah. The Gemara will tell us what the difference is. And what over here, Tanakama called milchemet mitzvah, Rabbi Yehuda is calling chova. Not only is it a mitzvah to do, it's absolutely mandatory. It's not just a good deed that you should do it, you must do it. But also referring to defensive war and agreeing that there are no exemptions, everybody must go. Good. Ma'ika ben Rabbi Yosef Galili. Ika benayu averad rabbanan. So the question we mentioned before, both Rabbi Yosef Galili said anyone who's a sinner is exempt. Rabbi Yosef said anyone who's entering into a prohibited marriage is exempt. Now, they are sinners. So what's the difference between these two opinions? And the answer is, if someone violates a law, that's only asur midrabanan. According to Rabbi Yosef Galili, he says even a derabanan sinner returns home, whereas Rabbi Yosef, he mentioned only examples of deoraita prohibitions, right? A kohen to a divorcee, mamzer, and so only if he violated those or deoraita laws does he go home. Otherwise, if it's only the rabbanan, he has to stay at the battlefield. Keman azla hadetanya. So now that we understand the difference between them, who would be the author of this baraita? Sach ben tefila litfila, averahi biyado v'chozer aleha meorchei milchama, keman keRabbi Yosef Galili. The baraita says that someone who speaks between tefillah is the singular of tefillin. Someone who talks after putting on tefillin shel yad, before they put on tefillin shel rosh, this is a sin. And the sin is severe enough that he will return. If there's a war, he will be sent back home for this sin. Now, this is it's not proper, but it's not a deoraita. So obviously, this baraita follows Rabbi Yossi HaGalili that says even for violating a derabanan, one must go home. Okay, this is very interesting Gemara for many reasons. We know Ashkenazim have the custom that they say a separate baracha on tefillin shel yad and then another baracha on tefillin shel rosh. Sfaradim say just one baracha on tefillin shel yad and make sure not to talk in between. However, if by mistake someone would talk after tefillin shel yad, then the Sfaradi also would say another beracha on tefillin shel rosh. Ashkenazim apparently, maybe they're more talkative, and they're afraid that people will talk, and so then they say a beracha by default. But we see that you should not supposed to you're not supposed to talk and then have to trigger an extra beracha for no reason. They should be together. There's a good philosophical reason for this. The idea behind it is tefillin shel yad, that represents our actions. All of our actions should be following Torah, the Ten Commandments, Shema, everything that's in the tefillin. And the tefillin shel rosh represents our thoughts, our mind, our decisions. Should always follow the Torah. And so, someone who interrupts between the two, it means he is disconnecting his thoughts and his actions. His thoughts are one thing, his actions are something else. And that's the essential problem. All right, a person should always connect directly his actions and his thoughts. So maybe that is a musar lesson behind it. Or it could just simply be that these are two parts of one mitzvah, and therefore they should be done together. In any case, this would be something that is not like the worst thing anyone ever did. It's only derabanan, and so therefore this baraita has to be Yossi HaGalili. Now, man tana lahad tanu rabanan. Who is the author of the following baraita? Shama kol keranot vehirtiya, hagafat risin vehirtiya, sichsua harabot, umayim shotetin lo al birkav hozer, keman. This baraita says if someone heard the sounds of the trumpets and he starts trembling, he hears the shields of the enemy and he starts trembling. He hears them sharpening the swords and he starts peeing on himself out of fear. So that guy returns. Who would be the author? Keman lema Rabbi Akiva devela Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. It sounds like that would be Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said that the pasukim are pasuk is kemashma'ah, someone who's physically afraid of the physical battle. And this guy, that's precisely what he is. And it sounds like Rabbi Yossi HaGalili would disagree. And Rabbi Yossi HaGalili says, even though you're shaking in your pants, still you have to go and fight. But does that really make sense? Would you want this guy to go and fight? The enemy is just going to look at him and make fun of him. It says, no, even Rabbi Yossi HaGalili would agree that this person is exempt, because the pasuk actually gives a reason and says he should go home because his brother's heart will melt like his. When he's shaking in his pants, people will see him and say, oh, he's afraid, I should be afraid too. We don't want that person around for morale reasons. That's one reason. So to be even Rabbi Yossi HaGalili agrees that someone who's physically afraid of the battlefield should go home. He agrees on that. It's just that Rabbi Yossi HaGalili is adding someone who has a spiritual fear of sin also should go home. Okay, next section. So then they go and appoint these guards in the front and in the back. We're just questioning the wording of the Mishnah when it says the beginning of fleeing is falling. Well, chronologically it should be the opposite. The beginning of falling is fleeing. In other words, first you flee, and so fleeing will prompt falling. So it should say that what starts the falling, the losing of the battle, it's the fleeing that comes before it. So wouldn't that make more sense? And they said, you're right. You should change the words, or at least change the understanding of, to be that the beginning of falling is fleeing. Okay, I think it actually could make sense the other way around also, that mipne techilat nisa, right, the beginning of fleeing, that the fleeing is the first step towards falling. But okay, it works. It works, I guess, better by switching it around. All right. Now we said the exemptions only apply when it's an elective war. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Reshut d'Rabanan, Zohi Misvah d'Rabbi Yehuda. Misvah d'Rabanan, Zohi Chova d'Rabbi Yehuda. There's only really two categories of war: elective, or wars that are expansionary, or obligatory wars. And it's just a matter about what you call them. Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yochanan explains that the Reshut of Tanakama is reworded, is categorized as mitzvah according to Rabbi Yehuda. Whereas what Rabbanan called mitzvah, Rabbi Yehuda calls chova. So Rabbi Yehuda is just kind of raising up the level of each one of them. Amadava, milchamot Yoshua lichbosh divrei kol chova. Milchamot bet David levacha divrei kol reshut. Now we're going to give examples of each category. The wars of Yoshua to go and conquer the land in the first place, that was necessary. The Torah says, go and inherit the land. And so that certainly is obligatory. Whatever you call obligatory mitzvah, right? We're using here Rabbi Yehuda's terms. And now the wars of Bet David, that David, when he wanted to expand beyond the borders, he wanted to go up to Syria and get more land that is not part of the official borders of Israel. So to expand, that everyone agrees is an optional war, and in which case you would have exemptions. Ki pelige, however, the difference between them is the meute nochrim de la lete alayhu mar karile misva or mar karile reshut nafka mina lo osek b'misva shepatur min ha-misva. The difference between Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, what you see here is that according to Rava, there actually is a substantive difference in categorization between the two sages. Rava seems to disagree with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says there's really only two categories, and they're just calling them different things, because for Rabbanan, he has Reshut and Mitzvah, and Rabbi Yehuda, he's saying, no, it's Mitzvah and Chova, right? So Rabbi Yehuda is emphasizing more the commandment and even obligation to war, for war. But otherwise, there's only two categories where you're just shifting them around. According to Rava, actually, there are three different categories, and two of them are undisputed, that if it's self-defense or to conquer the land, or Amalek would be another example, that would be Chova, and everyone has to go out to war. Whereas if it's just for expansion and totally elective, you don't have to do it, it's just nice to have more land, then that would be totally optional according to everyone. And the middle category, that's what they're arguing about. If you have a war to reduce the Gentiles, the enemies, so that they will not start up with you in the future. In other words, right now the enemy is not coming to you, so it's not a defensive war strictly. Also, however, they may be a threat in the future. And so you want to preempt right now. Like, Iran is building some nuclear capabilities, and Israel wants to go and reduce those capabilities. Not because Iran is attacking right now. It's not exactly self-defense. But on the other hand, it's not totally just expansionary. We're not taking their land, and there is a more of a pressing need. There is a threat, a future threat, and so this kind of preemptive in the future is that called offensive or defensive? So here the Tanakama would call it a mitzvah. Rabbi Yehuda would call it a milchemet mitzvah. He says, no, you should go do that. That is an important thing to do. Whereas Tanakama would say, reshut, if you want, you can, but it's not going to call it mitzvah. Now, what's the difference if you call it one or the other? The difference is, osek min ha-mitzvah, tu min ha-mitzvah. There's a general rule that if you're involved in one mitzvah, then you don't have to distract yourself and go do a different mitzvah. So in this case, you have the fighter pilot. He's going to Iran to do this bombing. Does he have to stop in the middle of the mission because there's a mitzvah to do? So according to the Yehuda, no, he's involved in the mitzvah right now, so he's exempt from the other. According to Rabbanan, he's doing something optional, but it could be a good idea to do, but it's not called a mitzvah, so therefore he should do that, find the time to make sure to do the other mitzvah, and only on his free time should he go and go on that mission. So that would be a practical difference. And so according to Rava, there are in fact three categories, and that's why that shift indicates that middle category is subject to a machloket. And this is a very important discussion for ethics of war, and a good way to think about these three different categories, and therefore the levels of responsibility and obligation, and who should go out to war. It makes sense, there's a lot of talk now about who should be exempt from battle and who should go out to war, and this is an important consideration. Perhaps you could say, well, it depends on the situation. Are we in a time of war? What kind of war? Is it defensive? Is it offensive? Is it something in the middle? Some people should be exempt. Nobody should be exempt. Right? Will depend on a lot of factors. So even though the rabbis are living at a time when they didn't have an army and they weren't fighting battles, but luckily, they're explaining these pesukim and these exemptions, and through that we can learn a lot about the ethics of war as they can apply today. Hadran alach meshuach milchama. Let's now start on the 9th and last perek. I'm going to have some long dapim coming up, and this perek is all about, begins about the topic of Agla Arufa, Bilshon HaKodesh Nemalki Maseh Halal Ba'adama, V'yasu Zekenecha Ve'shofetecha. Agla Arufa, when there's an unsolved murder, and the elders, the judges go out and do the Agla Arufa ceremony. They have to say a few statements, and those statements have to be said in Hebrew. As it says, if you find a body, ba'adama, we'll see what that means, and so zekenecha and shofetecha, the elders and the judges, will go out. How does that mean that we should say it in Hebrew? The Gemara will explain. Let's look at the Pisukim inside before we go further. Ki maseh chalab adama shel nai lehecha noten lecha lishtan nofel basadeh lo noda mihikahu. If in the land you see a slain person lying out in the open, and we don't know who is the murderer, Yasu zekenecha ve'shoftecha. We'll spend a lot of time today on these two words. Umadidu el ha'arim ha'shizboteh halal, and they will measure the distance to the nearby towns. So you see these zekenim that come from the local town are not the same as the zekenim that it says over here. The Mishnah is about to say that this zekenecha shoftecha is referring to members of the Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim. After all, first they have to measure and see who is the closest town, and only then, once they determine that, then those elders from the closest town can come, and they continue, and they take the heifer down to the wadi, and heifer that never did any work. And they will break its neck from the back. That's why it's called oref. Oref means the back of the neck, not regular shechita. It is a violent way of killing it, and is supposed to reenact the violence of the murder. In some way, like the blood, the guilt of the victim cannot be atoned except by the blood of the murderer. But here we don't have the blood of the murderer; otherwise, you do capital punishment. And so here, this eglah is somehow replacing symbolically that the murder and the victim and the murderer. So the Kohanim are going to come and they're going to be involved. And the elders will wash their hands, meaning that they are free from guilt, washing their hands, they're innocent. And this is what they say, and this is what they have to say in Hebrew, that we are not responsible. They have to say this because perhaps indirectly they are responsible. And it's a reminder for the leaders that they have to keep public order and teach morals and make sure things like this don't happen. So this is also an atonement ceremony because they cannot actually find the murderer. So this will be a collective atonement. and Rambam has an innovative reason for this mitzvah. He says the reason for this and bringing out the Sanhedrin, the elders, and all the people is to publicize the crime, so that people will say, oh, did you hear about that crime? I wonder who did it, and everybody will start talking about it. And then if someone has a tip and they say, oh, what day was that? Oh yeah, I was wondering, I saw some suspicious person, and they'll bring that to the authorities. So according to Rambam, this is not only a spiritual atonement and a reminder for the leaders, but actually may very well come to practical benefit in actually finding who the murderer is. That would be the best goal. Good. So Mishnah continues. Now, three members of the Bet Din Hagadol, the Sanhedrin from Jerusalem, they have to go out to that place of the murder, the scene of the crime. Rabbi Yehuda omer chamisha, shneimah zikenecha shenayim, v'shofetecha shenayim, v'en bet din shakul, mosifin halem od shenayim. While Tanakama says only three, Rabbi Yehuda says five, and he learns it from zikenecha, which is plural, that's two, shofetecha is plural, that's two, so you have four, but you can't have an even number of a bet din, so therefore you have to add one, that's where he gets five. The Gemara will explain how Tanakama get three. נמצא טמון בגל או תלוי באילן או סף על פני המים לא היו עורפין שנאמר באדמה לא טמון בגל נופל ולא תלוי באילן בשדה ולא סף על פני המים. If they find that the body is under a pile of stones and you can't see it, or if it's floating on, or it's hanging from a tree, or it's floating on water, they would not do the egladufa ceremony, because it says if you find a slain person ba'adama on the land, but not under rocks, nofel, that he fell onto the ground, but not hanging from a tree, and it says in the field, but not in the water. So those don't count. Nimsa samuch lasefar o le'ir sheruba nochrim o le'ir she'en ba betin lo hayu orfin. Also, if it's close to the border of the country or the majority of inhabitants are not Jewish, or if there's no betin, then also they would not do agla arufa. The idea here is that if it's at a border or mostly non-Jews, and most likely it's not someone not Jewish that killed him. So this is already not an internal problem, but a border issue or a foreigner issue that's going to be dealt with differently than if it's an internal issue that agla arufa we have to atone for. And also, if there's no bet din, then, there's no bet din there, so it needs a bet din of 23 in that city, because in order to do the next steps, so just practically wouldn't be able to. The Gemara will elaborate more on this as well. And modin ela le'ir sheyesh ba bet din, and so we can only measure to a city that has a bet din, and the Gemara will explain, of 23 judges. Good. Now the Gemara says, "My kamad, where'd you get the fact that they have to say this in Hebrew?" Amar bi Abu hachi kama shene'emar ve'anu ve'ameru lanu omer ve'anu halvim ve'ameru. Ma'ani amura lahalan b'shon hakodesh afkan b'shon hakodesh, because it says that the elders are going to go and recite, and they're going to say it uses double language, anu and ameru. And as we saw earlier, a few dapim ago, regarding the berachot and kelot, also uses that double language. They'll speak up and say, and just like berachot and kelot by the Leviim are in Hebrew, so to this has to be in Hebrew. They said that agla rufa kesad. Now we want to elaborate on the details of how it works. Ki maseh ba'adama v'yasu zechaneh v'shoftech shosham betin gadol shebirushalayim hayu yotzin. Rabbi Yehuda omer chamisha. This is all a long quote from the Mishnah. תנו רבנן, ויצאו זקניך ושופטיך, זקניך שניים, שופטיך שניים, ואת בית דין שקום אוספינן עוד אחד, הרי כאן חמישה דברי רבי יהודה. Now Braita is going to further explain what said the Mishnah. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, which we already knew. We have one double noun and another double noun. That's 2 plus 2, and we need an odd number, so we have to add 1 for 5. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon now will explain the Tanakama of the Mishnah. Zekanecha shenayim. We're only going to learn from the word zekanecha. Zekanecha, that means elders, the elders of the Sanhedrin, and that means 2. Ve'et bet din shakul mosifin ala en od echad, hare kan shena shelosha. You can't have an even number, so you have to add 1. So he's just focusing on one word. Now the obvious question, there's 2 words there. What are you going to do with the word shoftecha? And the answer is, we need that word to teach us that it has to be members of the Sanhedrin. Shoftecha, your judges, the special judges, the highest ones, the ones that are on the Supreme Court, on the Sanhedrin. So zekene shoftecha means the Supreme Court. Zekenecha means you need 2, and then we add 1. That's all to be Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda. Has Rabbi Yehuda know that you need members of the Sanhedrin? Maybe you could get other judges. Me zikne zekenecha nafka. You could have said zikne. That's already plural. Zekenecha, your judges, right? This prestigious judges. That extra chaf. That's what we learned. That has to be from members of Sanhedrin. So now turn the tables back to Rabbi Shimon. What do you do with that zikne zikenecha, that extra chaf? Katav rachamana zikneha v'amina afilu zikneha shuk. Katav rachamana zikenecha. V'katav rachamana zikenecha v'amina afilu Sanhedrin ketana. Katav rachamana v'shoftecha l'miuchadim shebeshoftecha. Rabbi Shimon says, I need that also, because we need multiple steps of how high the judge has to be. If it had zikne without the chaf, then I would say any old elders from the marketplace, someone who's wiser than most of the people around, and so anyone who can qualify as a judge to go out to the site. And so therefore, it says zekenecha has to be at least a level higher than that. But if it only had zekenecha, I would say maybe it's enough to get it from a small Sanhedrin, a Sanhedrin of 23 judges, which there were several of, and you wouldn't need the Sanhedrin Gedolah. So that's why it says v'shoftecha as well, to say, no, you need the Sanhedrin of 71 judges. You need 3 of those people to come out. So I need shoftecha, and I need the extra chaf. So Rabbi Yehuda, how are you going to learn that double level? If you only have the extra chaf, then you only know that it has to be the medium judge. How do you know it has to be the highest judge? He answers, Gamar zikne mizikne ha'eda. Ma lahlan miuchadin sheba'eda, afkan miuchadin sheba'eda. Rabbi Yehuda can learn a gezerah shava. It says the word zikne over here regarding egladufa. And also says the word zikne in Vayikra chapter 4 when it talks about the a korban. Im kol hayadat yisel yishku. If everybody how could everybody make a mistake? It's talking about the Sanhedrin. They issue a mistaken ruling, and then that means the Sanhedrin has to bring a special korban chatat. It says samechu zikne ha'edah. The word zikneh here clearly was referring to only the Sanhedrin, so too the word zikneh in Nigladufa is referring to the Sanhedrin only. So that I could learn from a gezerah shava. But now we have a problem because this answer is too good. Igamar ligmera likula milata mehatam. Once you have a gezerah shava, you can learn that's the highest level just from the gezerah shava. So now, why do you need the zikneh zikenecha, the extra chaf? All right, that would be extra. So you know what? Okay, forget that gezerah shava. And zikenecha v'shofetecha lamali. Why do I need all these words? I'll explain everything. Elava v'shoftecha liminyana. Rather, he's going to use this extra vav for something else. As follows. He'll learn from the word zikenecha that you need 2. From the word shoftecha, Rabbi Yehuda will agree with Rabbi Shimon. That teaches shoftecha, the Sanhedrin. But the vav of shoftecha adds 2 more. So shoftecha is Sanhedrin, zekanecha is 2, the vav is 2, and that you can't have an odd even number, so you add 1. And so without the gezerah shava, he can learn everything. Now with Rabbi Shimon, what are you going to do with that vav? And his answer is vav la mashma le. He's not going to learn anything from the extra vav. You don't always have to. We'll skip the parentheses. Ela me'ata v'yaseu shenayim umadedu shenayim Rabbi Yehuda hare kan tish'ah Rabbi Shimon hare kan shiva. Hold on. If now every time you have a plural noun, you're going to say that means 2, right? Because he said zekenecha, that's 2, or the vav can extra 2. So let's say just zekenecha means 2. So now when it says that they're going to go measure, and it says that in plural, they're going to go out in plural, and they're going to measure in plural. So now you have to add 4 more to whatever number you had before. Rabbi Yehuda already had 5. So now it's going to be 9. Rabbi Shimon had 3. You can add 4 more. That's going to be 7. So if you're going to continue this methodology, you're going to need a lot more. And nobody says that's the halacha. So we answer, no. These we need for to teach something else. Sahu hen velo shelucha hen madidu shafilu nimsa ba'alil la'ir hayu modidin shemisva la'asok b'medida. Yasu teaches that the judges have to go themselves and they can't send a messenger. They have to go. This would support the Rambam's opinion that the point is to publicize. And so when you have the members of the Supreme Court, they're going out and, with their full regalia, and everybody's going to say, oh, what are the Supreme Court judges doing all the way out here? And then they'll be talking about it. So you have to give it that significance. That's why it says, V'yatzu, meaning particularly them. That's not adding more people, but saying not a messenger. Amadidu says even if the site of the crime is actually close to a city, and it's kind of obvious to everyone that this is the closest city, nevertheless they actually have to take out a ruler or their feet and measure it. Because there's a mitzvah to go through the entire specific ritual and actually do the measurements. So that's why it emphasizes that by saying umadidu, and we don't learn from here that you'd need 2 more judges for this. And we'll continue with this tomorrow. Baruch Adonai L'olam, Amen ve'amen.